For our reading this morning, I would like to share some portions of a beautiful poem by Khalil Gibran called On Pleasure. It begins like this. Then a hermit who visited the city once a year came forth and said, "Speak to us of pleasure." And he answered, saying, "Pleasure is a freedom song, but it is not freedom. It is the blossoming of your desires, but it is not their fruit. It is a depth calling into a height, but it is not the deep or the high. It is the caged taking wing, but it is not space encompassed. Aye, and very truth, pleasure is a freedom song." I want to share with you one of the most precious set of memories I have. When I had the profound joy of giving birth to my children, I was a pretty ancient mother at the time. I heard the doctor one time saying to a nurse, due to her advanced maternal age, and if I hadn't been 17 months pregnant, I would have slugged somebody, but that's a whole other, goes in the grievance pile. Well, when my first child was born, and it took a few days to kick in because, if you've been through this, at the beginning there's some adjustment that has to take place. But I remember that feeling of holding this little one, this miraculous little person, skin to skin, and knowing that in that moment, in that interaction, recognizing that same simple process has been in the lives of hundreds of millions of women for millions of years. That the feeling of not only holding but being needed, and the complete peace of this baby. Now, my first child was a born snuggler. My first child could snuggle into any, like a cat, fit into any. My second child was a wiggler. But still, it was an experience of pleasure, really deep pleasure. And when it was over, I had a little bit of grief, especially when I knew that, I wouldn't have other children. So what I want to begin this sharing of words with you is by saying that there's a difference between pleasure and sensation. I felt, I smelled, I touched, I heard, I saw. There were many sensations in this experience, beautiful experience, and they were wonderful. And there was also a connection. It was also an emotional, for me, sense of satisfaction. I have a picture that I look at sometimes with this child at the end of, one of the nursing sessions, and this child is like this. The most relaxed human being I have ever seen in my entire life. And I feel joy when I look at that picture because I remember those moments. We are living, you and I are living in a time where it is a full-time job to avoid advertising of all kinds. Advertising that consistently pushes us. It doesn't just invite us, it pushes us to seek sensation, more and more and more sensation, to feel good, to feel more good than we thought we needed to feel. It doesn't necessarily call us to pleasure. it calls us to have the repeated, whether it's the advertisement that shows a woman having a moment with a piece of chocolate, or the guy who drives his fancy car up the steps of a castle, right? It's oh, I didn't know I needed that, but now I want it. There's a wonderful book published by the Hagley Museum in Delaware, and it's the first study of capitalism and sensation. And it writes about the history. There's a woman whose name, Louisa Slade is her name. There's a woman who I didn't know her name, but she spent 25 years doing science that has now been incorporated into roughly 75% of our processed foods. And she started with Oreo cookies, so that every single Oreo cookie ever made provides the exact same set of sensations, right? So and I know I pick on Oreo cookies way too much, but secretly I'm a fan. We are scientifically, visually, auditorily, and in many ways, our senses have actually been changed by what we have seen and what we have. And many of us, myself included, maybe some of you, many of us in our society are so addicted to sensation, we can't stop. Who does that serve? Who is profiting from our addiction to sensation? Who profits from us spending money we don't have to buy things we don't need? I raise this question for you to think about and to answer, because when we're afraid, and many of us are afraid, when we're afraid, our capacity to think rationally shuts down. Our world gets small, and we go into fight or flight mode. Well, at least I do. And it's important to back out a little bit and to think about what's really happening. Do I really need another sweater? Do I really need another car? Do I really need a new kitchen? It's almost like an invasion to nonstop sensation. Pleasure has a different quality to it. In his poem, Khalil Gibran talks about it is a pleasure for the bee to gather nectar from the flower, and it is a pleasure for the flower to yield its nectar to the bee. Pleasure only becomes sin when it causes damage. Pleasure only becomes sin when my pleasure becomes more important than your autonomy, your agency, your dignity. Adrienne Marie Brown, who is a wonderful, maybe some of you are familiar with her work, who is a wonderful author and thinker who's written a fantastic book. The illustration on the cover of the Order of Service is of her. It's one wonderful book called Pleasure Activism, and she says she has essays from other writers, including Audre Lorde in this book, and she says this: pleasure is a way of resisting. Finding and seeking pleasures in our life, whether it's holding a baby, whether it's taking a walk outside, whatever pleasure you can gain from your time, listening to beautiful music, playing or singing beautiful music, contributing to a congregation, enjoying coffee hour. Pleasure changes that fear perspective in our brain. Audre Lorde wrote, she's no longer with us, but she was one of the first people to write about this, and she called listening to our desires and need for pleasure, she called that answering the yes inside of us. The yes. Think about that for a moment. How often do you pay attention to your no? How often have you heard someone say, ooh, I'm going to be bad. I'm going to have a cupcake. Or whatever less sanitized statement they might make. I'm going to be bad. Listening to my yes is wrong. And when we don't listen to our yes, and I'm not talking, and neither Adrienne Marie Brown or Naomi Shihab Nye or Khalil Gibran are telling us to go crazy and go to excess and plunder the earth for our pleasure. Quite the opposite. The yes that you and I have inside of us is not a yes to destroy. It's not a yes to be evil to one another. We do it because we're human and we make mistakes, but that's not a yes. That's a no. Can you think, whether it's physical touch, whether it's the pleasure that you feel when someone you really love or you really care about comes into the room? Is it the pleasure of enjoying together a meal that you have both prepared and savoring it and feeling the gratitude for every part of that gift? Is it the pleasure of sharing what you have with someone else? Is it the pleasure of dancing until you can't dance anymore? I make a confession. I got so tired of my hip exercises after this, mildly catastrophic hip surgery, I decided to just start dancing instead. And you know what? It worked. But I do it privately. I don't go out on the street and subject anybody to this, but I do it privately. And I smile. And I smile when I'm doing it because it is pleasurable to listen to music I love and to dance in my apartment or to sing in my shower. As Unitarian Universalists, we are called to resist. And we are called to practice empathy, compassion, and love, even toward those who are instrumental in our oppression. But it's not all about suffering, because suffering keeps us small. Am I making sense to you guys? At least for me, it keeps me trapped. But pleasure opens us back up. Pleasure is resistance. How will you practice pleasure activism today? I'm going to close. I'm going to share our sixth moment of truth before we sing our closing hymn. Our sixth moment of truth is this: every human being on United States soil is entitled to due process, regardless of immigration status, regardless of whether they are suspected of a minor or a serious crime. This means every single individual taken into custody must go before a court to hear what they are being accused of and to be able to answer those charges. No exceptions. The current recruiting ad for new ICE agents says this, and I quote, "America needs you. America has been invaded by criminals and predators. We need you to get them out. You do not need an undergraduate degree." You know, this statement is full of lies. but I want you to notice the language. The Trump administration is normalizing the language of invasion. If we accept that there's an invasion from without, we will accept an invasion by our own siblings. All 4 presidents, United States presidents, who suspended due process, did so under the actual real threat of some kind of invasion.